The only significance was gender. And that's been a robust finding, right across the research. Paying attention to things, spatial ability, self-confidence, those psychological factors, resilience, these are all things that males seem to present with in greater levels than females. Clearly, it helps with dart throwing. I'm Dr Linda Duffy. I'm a professor of sports psychology at Middlesex University. Many years ago, I was a professional dart player. I was world number one for 5 years back in the 80s. I played at a very high level, played county, played international, and won several major tournaments, and had a really good career as a dart player. I got married and had a couple of children, and decided that I couldn't travel the world and play darts anymore. So I went back to studying, and I took up psychology. When I played darts, actually, I always wondered about the psychology of the sport because, as you all know, it's not really a really physical sport, but there's a lot of psychology involved. And I always wondered, particularly how men were always so much better than women. So when I went back to study, I took up psychology, and my doctoral thesis was about males and females and target throwing. I always wondered, wherever I went across the world playing darts, it was always that the males were better than the females. And I always wondered why this was, because, we used to practice as much as the men. We used to travel, we used to do all the same things, but our performance levels could never really reach that of the males. And so when I decided to do a PhD, I wanted this to be the focus of my doctoral research. And so I investigated dart players of all levels, gender, across age, across experience, really, scientifically, rigorously investigated them to see why this could be that males always outperform females. Findings from my doctoral research were that males outperform females at all levels across dart playing. And I looked at professional dart players of the day. So this was back in the late 80s, early 90s. So all the top players of that day, John Lowe, Eric Bristow, etc., Jockey Wilson, were all part of the research, and the top women as well, not myself included, but the top women of the day. So we looked at age, we looked at physicality, so the height of players, arm length. We looked at experience of playing, how many years they played. We looked at the level of skill they'd acquired, so whether they were professional, whether they were international or county level, or just, keen amateurs. And the most salient factor coming out of all of these was gender. Gender was the biggest predictor of dart performance across all these levels. And it really sort of mimicked studies that I looked at while I was doing my doctoral thesis by, say, for example, Kai Muir and Watson and Thomas and French. Thomas and French actually did a meta-analysis on motor performance across age, and they looked at 30,000 young people between the age of 3 years old and 20 years old. And the most robust finding that they had across 13 different tasks, I believe it was, of throwing, hopping, different types of throwing, skipping. The most robust finding they had was that the differences in gender, that boys across all age groups outperform girls, particularly on throwing. I mean, anecdotally, when you watch males play darts, you can see that they do throw the darts quite differently to many women. And I'm generalising here because some women throw the same sort of with the same technique as men, but generally the male technique is more aesthetically pleasing, but it's more effective, is the point. That it's they are, you only got to look at male averages compared to female averages at the very highest level, and there's a huge difference, a huge significant difference between the averages that the top males are, turning out and the averages that the females are turning out. It is down to technique, but there's also psychological factors. As I said, during my research, we looked at all the physical factors that you could look at, and none of those were significant. The only significance was gender, and that's been a robust finding, right across the research. Also, the psychological factors are clearly the ones that are at play here. Things like being, paying attention to things, spatial ability, self-confidence, those psychological factors, resilience. These are all things that males seem to present with in greater levels than females. Clearly, it helps with dart throwing. Well, my thoughts on the Noa-Lynn story are that I don't know Noa at all. I don't know their status at all. I don't know the person in question. My thoughts on categories for females and males to play darts are very strong. I think females should have a category to play darts separate to males. I think we should probably have an open category as well where anybody can play. But I think keeping males and females separate is very important. It's for years women have struggled to get some kind of parity in darts with men, and it hasn't happened. I've felt over the last couple of years it has taken an upward turn. I think the PDC have put on the women's tour now, and they've put on a match play for the women, and I started to think that things were turning in the right direction. And now the transgender issue, if you want to call it an issue, has muddied the water, if you like. I think transgender people should be allowed to play darts. They should be allowed to play any sport. I'm just glad I don't have the job of picking the category that they have to play in, because that's a difficult question. To be able to answer if transgender women have a biological advantage over women, I think I would need to know the biology of each transgender woman, to be honest. I know that when you look at things like testosterone reduction therapies, that the effect of them are not really enough to suppress testosterone to the extent that it makes a difference with throwing, anyway, with darts. I mean, I don't know about other sports, but I do know that testosterone does play a role in the psychology of males and the psychology of females. So, it has an impact. So without knowing, the status of an individual's testosterone levels, I wouldn't be able to say whether there's an unfair advantage or not. But I know definitely between males and females, there's a biological advantage for males. And I think, the impact of testosterone during puberty, for example, is very difficult to reverse if it is possible to reverse it. So again, you would have to know when the individual transitioned, the impact of testosterone, how strong that was, etc. There are a lot of factors and variables at play here, so I couldn't really say on an individual basis. And I think trans people should be allowed to play sport. Obviously, I think sport is for all. I think there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. I think the IOC now have gone a long way towards sort of deferring these decisions down to the individual sports governing bodies. I think it has to be taken sport by sport. I think if there's a biological advantage for males, which reflects testosterone levels in a way when we're looking at physique, and also some aspects of cognition and psychology as well. I think where there is an advantage, I think that males and females need to be kept, separate. I think there should be separate categories, because of fairness. And also, if we want sports to be global, there are some communities that would not allow women to play in with men. So we need to be mindful of those communities as well, if we want sport to be global and we want sport to be for all. That's why we have categories. That's why we don't have able people playing against disabled people. That's why we don't have adult people playing against youths in sport. It has to be based on fairness. Now, where that line of fairness goes, thankfully is not my decision, but then it has to be a line of fairness somewhere.